You're in the right place, certainly today, every day, 3 hours a day. By now you've heard the Supreme Court has ruled that affirmative action is out when it comes to colleges and universities and admissions. Justice Roberts wrote the decision. He did say, look, there's no problem with individuals telling their life story. Typically, you write these essays to get into college and university, not just part of an SAT or so forth. But you have to do that as an individual. You can't speak for an entire race, and you can't be treated as an entire race, one applicant. That's stereotypical. Ladies and gentlemen, there were a number of Asian American students who brought this lawsuit against Harvard. Harvard created a racist, bigoted admissions policy against Asians. It even stereotyped Asians, saying that they don't really have the kind of personalities that would lend themselves to the diverse student population that we seek here at Harvard College. This is flat-out racism. The Congressional Black Caucus is appalled at what the Supreme Court did. The three radical leftists on the court, obviously, they endorsed racism. Joe Biden, who I'll get to in a minute, the last remaining of the old white supremacists, he says he's severely disappointed. There's something wrong with the court. So it's okay if you treat Asian Americans differently than everybody else, according to Joe Biden. Everybody else. Now let's get something straight. These Democrats are resegregating our society. You have dorms for blacks and whites. You have commencement for blacks and whites. Critical race theory separates the nation into blacks and whites. They are resegregating our society. They are resegregating our country. No longer e pluribus unum. No longer diversity, yes, but one culture. No. Never. These same Democrats, and I will call them George Wallace Democrats, the Congressional Black Caucus, George Wallace Democrats, Joe Biden, George Wallace Democrat, the three dummies on the court, George Wallace Democrats. That's what they are. George Wallace would be thrilled with the conclusions that they've reached. Thrilled. Asian Americans today, African Americans tomorrow. After that, Hispanic Americans. What's to stop a college, a university, or anything else? 50 years ago, it was Jews. 70 years ago, it was blacks. Today, it's Asians. Same damn Democrat Party. The George Wallace Party. The remnants, certainly intellectually, are still all around us. Just look. Yes, they say. State institutions and private institutions of higher learning should be able to discriminate against people based on their heritage. Wow. George Wallace would be proud. Not so much Abraham Lincoln. These same George Wallace Democrats oppose school choice. They pretend that they want minorities, other than Asians, of course, and Jews, of course, but they want minorities to have equity. But they do not want minorities to have an opportunity when it comes to crossing the lines of the government Democrat Party teacher unions. Isn't that amazing? Where's the Congressional Black Caucus on there? Nowhere. Because their coffers are lined with teachers' union money and their army of teachers on Election Day. First things first here, folks. We're all the white intellectuals about school choice for little black kids. They oppose it. They want government schools. Nothing more, nothing less. Doesn't matter if test scores are gone down the toilet. Doesn't matter if little kids are going to school are facing criminalization and other horrific things when they get there. Doesn't matter. No school choice, but yes, racial discrimination and resegregating America. That they're for. The George Wallace Party is still with us. And it is amazing to see how many minority, black, so-called leaders, activists, sound like George Wallace. It doesn't amaze me that Biden sounds like George Wallace. That used to be one of his heroes. Sotomayor is an ignoramus. Writing for the minority. Talks about superficial neutrality. Superficial neutrality. Really? Can I read you something, folks? There's so much to cover here. Stick with me. I've already broken this down in a way that nobody else can. No brag, just fact. Race. Racial quotas in medical school admissions. This is what we had until today. Discrimination against Asian Americans seeking entry into Harvard. Segregating college dorm rooms and graduation ceremonies. Dumbing down school curricula. Sabotaging merit scholarship programs. Issuing presidential executive orders that, for instance, exclude white farmers and other privileged racial groups. Yes, this is from the Democrat Party Hates America. Isn't it amazing? Because of the emphasis on race is the basis for all behaviors and outcomes. And allegations of irreversible white racism based on skin color at birth. Critical race theory and what I call, and I've invented this phrase now, civil rights Marxism. Civil rights Marxism, that's what this is. Dehumanize the individual and groups of individuals. Ironically, the scholars and activists promoting this point of view use dehumanizing stereotypes, not only to label white people, but to describe black individuals in the black community. After all, in the end, Marxism of any kind is built on the false foundation of oppressor and oppressed class identifications. Ibrahim X. Kendi, director of the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University, is one of the leading bigots in America, in my view, and a leading advocate of CRT, has written to say, ready? To say that there is widespread racial inequity caused by widespread racism. And by the way, this sounds like Sotomayor's opinion. She's all in, baby. To say that there's widespread racial inequity caused by widespread racism, which makes the U.S. racist, isn't an opinion. It isn't a partisan position. It's a doctrine. It isn't a left-wing construct. It's anti-white. It's an anti-American. It's fact. In fact, CRT scholars and activists dismiss all social efforts, economic programs, laws, court rulings, even the Civil War and the presidencies of Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant, as well as Martin Luther King's courageous activism and speeches, as little more than transparent and self-serving attempts by the white dominant society, or those who go along and help perpetuate white privilege, knowingly or otherwise, to paste over the the incurably flawed American founding. The civil rights Marxists, again as I call them, also reject both the idea and pursuit of a colorblind society. This gets to the nub of the matter. They're the modern-day segregationists. They're the modern-day racists. Lest we forget, Peter C. Myers, visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, reminds us that for Frederick Douglass, None of these phony civil rights leaders today can hold a candle to Frederick Douglass. The 19th century's greatest abolitionist and civil rights advocate. He said, an abiding faith in reason and truth and justice sustained an expectation that the color line will cease to have any civil, political, or moral significance in America. The most famous dissenting opinion in U.S. Supreme Court history. By the way, this is Douglass. Justice John Marshall Harlan provided a more focused expression of that sentiment, explaining his vote in Plessy versus Ferguson to invalidate a law mandating racial segregation on train cars. He said, our Constitution's colorblind. Excuse me. Law regards man as man, takes no account of his color when his civil rights as guaranteed by the supreme law of the land are involved. In his brief for the plaintiffs in landmark Brown versus Board of Education, Thurgood Marshall argued, distinctions based upon race or color alone are the epitome of the arbitrariness and capriciousness constitutionally impermissive under our system of government. He said 77 years after Plessy came to the most resounding statement of all, when the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. stood under the shadow of Abraham Lincoln and immortalized the moral vision of the civil rights movement by declaring, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will be judged by the color of their, where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The Democrat Party believes in none of this. Today's civil rights Marxism, again as I call it, preaches and demands the opposite. For example, Kendi has declared the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. They're going after Asians. Did Asians own slaves in America in the 1840s and 50s? I don't believe so. How ridiculous. The only remedy to present discrimination, he says, is future discrimination. These are the Marxists. Thus the demand for equity. Indeed, the movement has come up with a new term for condemning colorblindness. You want to hear this one? Colorblind racism. Did you know that's a new phrase? Now, when you get the Democrat Party hates America, you're going to learn a lot of things. In fact, a column by Danny Bostic, an educator and contributor to the Huffington Compost, further illustrates the point. She asserts, colorblindness foists whiteness on everyone. It is another way of saying I view everyone as if they were white. Your default color for sameness is white. She says colorblindness strips non-white people of their uniqueness. Your default culture for sameness is white culture. When you encourage your child to be colorblind and view everyone as the same, you're projecting white on people who aren't white, negating their experiences, traditions, and uniqueness. Again, this could sound like Sotomayor's outrageously pathetic opinion. Colorblindness suppresses critically important narratives of oppression, she says. Once you view everyone through a colorblind white lens, you deny the reality that non-white people face. She says, the great Huffington Compost, Dana Bostic, colorblindness assumes everyone has the same experience here in America. When you fail to see color, you fail to recognize injustice and oppression. She said colorblindness promotes the idea that non-white races are inferior. When you teach your child to be colorblind, you're essentially telling them, if someone isn't white, pretend they look like you so you can be friends. Stripping people of a fundamental aspect of their identity by claiming not to see color is dehumanizing. Get it? We've gone from don't make decisions, don't embrace stereotypes based on the color of somebody's skin, treat them like an individual human being, to do